we are again with another project. Today, I know I told you that I wanted to get rid of a lot of my scraps this year. I want to use them up in quilts. Well, that's what we're doing today. I've pulled a bunch of my bigger pieces of scraps. I know if you're at your house and you've got scraps, you may or may not have big pieces of scraps, but I've got a lot of scraps, and a lot of them are this size. That's a good size scrap. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a bunch of flying geese, and we're not using any solids. We're gonna try to use all prints and just put them together randomly. Just throw a piece together, make a flying geese, make a bunch of them, and put them together to a quilt. I have seen it done before, and I love that look. I've never done it, so we're gonna do it today. I wanna show you why I'm using my scraps. One, scraps, everyone has scraps. Almost everybody has scraps. And it's a good thing to use them and not throw them away or get rid of them. So scrappy quilts are good in the fact that you don't have to go buy fabric. You already have it at home. We're gonna piece it together. We're gonna make these scraps. Now I wanna show you why I wanna use these scraps. Let's go back to the back room. Here we are in the back room of the shop. These are some of our scraps. When I say we have scraps, we have a lot of scraps. This is not even a drop in the bucket yet. Then we have these cabinets over here. This tub right here is nothing but scraps. This up here is nothing but scraps. These are big pieces, and these are big pieces. And then you've got, these are quilts that people are coming to pick up, so ignore those. But all of these are color-coded scraps. So there's our pinks. There's some more pinks. There's some blues. So you'll see all of these drawers on both of these cabinets are color-coded. These we're going to cut up into fat quarters and then use them as scraps, and the same with these. Well, with the exception of this is a quilt. So we'll put this up here in the quilts pile. But all of these are scraps. And then we have a storage building outside that is nothing but scraps. So when I say we have scraps, we have scraps. Plus we have scraps at home in my sewing room. So we're going to try to bust through some of these with these flying geese and probably another 100 quilts this year, trying to get rid of some of these. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cut of fabric, which this was a fat quarter that was in my fabric bin, and I am going to iron them so that I can get these wrinkles out. I don't want to cut it before I get these wrinkles out. And I like to spray it with a little bit of Best Press to kind of starch it a little bit. Makes it easier to get those wrinkles out and makes it crisper for my cuts. Then I'm going to move this up a little bit, and I'm going to get this other half, spray it. I'm going to do this with every piece before I cut it, if it needs it. Now some pieces may not need it, but the majority of mine will, because they've been in a fabric tub or a fabric container, and they get wrinkly that way. So once I do that, we're going to go cut them, and I'll show you what we're going to do. Here we are with some of the pieces that we pulled out of the fabric bin back there, some of which we've ironed already and some we have not. So these we have ironed. And if you can tell by looking at my scraps, I obviously like polka dots, because almost all of these happen to be polka dots. But we're going to take two different fabrics and we're going to lay it out. Actually, I'm going to lay it this way. And in order to get my flying geese the size I want it, now you can do it whatever size you want to do them, I'm going to cut 3.5 by 6.5. So I'm going to cut my first piece 1, 2, 3.5. So I'm cutting right here. Then I'm going to turn it, and I want it 6.5 inches long by 3.5 inches wide. I'm gonna cut it there. And then I'm gonna cut my little pieces for the flying geese at 3.5 inch square. So this is going back in my fabric scraps. Believe it or not, I will find a use for that, probably in my strip quilt that I'm working on. So I'm gonna make a pile of 3.5 by 6.5 and a pile of 3.5 squares. And when I do the 3.5 squares, again, you can do this any way you want, but my 3.5 squares on each flying geese is gonna be the same print. You don't have to, you can do it in 2 different prints, but mine are gonna be the same size, same prints. So I'm gonna need at least 2 of each 3.5 inch size. And I'm gonna make a couple more of these because I'll pair them with a different fabric next time. Another scrap, and now I got 4 of those. So I'm gonna put that one to the side. I'll cut some more from it before it's over, but to show you what I'm doing, I'm gonna keep going. So I'm gonna do 3.5 by 6.5. Now this piece, by the time I get my seam allowance in it, you're not gonna see it. So that piece will be trashed. And I'm gonna cut another one of these and another one of these. And I'm gonna make these into my 3.5 inch squares. Line them up just right. And these are too small, so they're gonna go in my scrap bucket. I got 2 of those. I'm gonna cut a couple more. You can make these whatever size you want, but like I said, this is the size I wanted for this project. So that is what I'm doing. And again, I'm gonna need 2 of each print, so I'm gonna have to cut some more of this one. Line that ruler up just right. You want these cuts very accurate so that you don't have to worry about anything when you're piecing it, because they'll all fit perfectly together. This one is a little off, so I'm gonna flip it around and straighten it up. That tiny little bit could have messed me up, so we get rid of that. I'm gonna cut one more piece. And to make it easier, I'm gonna line it up folded like that. Do my 3.5. And I am doing my flying geese scrappy because, again, I'm trying to get rid of some of these scraps. So you can do them however. You can do them uniformed with one fabric line. You can do them scrappy, whatever. But I think this is going to be cute scrappy. I saw a quilt made like this, and it was super cute. And gets rid of my scraps. So let's take them back to the sewing table and put them together. I'm gonna take 1 of my 6.5 by 3.5 and 2 of my 3.5 squares. And I'm gonna lay them one on one side, lined up perfectly. And I could draw a line from one corner to the next. I've done enough of these where I don't need to do that. But if you are new at this, take a pencil on the back side of this and draw from a line from this corner to this corner, and that will be your sew line. So I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I am going to sew that on that line. Now that I'm at the other corner, I'm going to cut this piece off here. Now that I've got my sew line, I'm going to cut on the outside of that, about a 1/4 inch away from that seam line. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just get it away from that seam line so you're not cutting into that seam. Then I'm going to take it and I'm going to do like this, open it up, put these to the side. Again, they'll go in my scrap pile. I'm going to do the same thing with this square. I'm going to sew diagonally down the other side, making sure it stays lined up. Then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to cut about a 1/4 inch off that seam line. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to iron it flat, and there's my flying geese. Once you get all your flying geese made, you'll measure them and you'll want them all the same size, and you'll trim them up like this little piece here that hangs off. I'll trim that up and make it so that it's straight across right there. Then I'm going to take 2 of my flying geese and I'm going to sew them together going the same way. Now, I've seen this quilt several different ways. You can do 4 at a time, you can do 2 at a time. You can make all of your flying geese go the same way throughout the whole quilt. I'm not doing that. I'm going to do 2 this way, and then I'm going to do 2 this way, and that's how I'm going to start sewing mine together. But you could do it this way all the way across it. You could do 2 this way and 2 sideways, however you want to put them together, because these are a square now. So I'm going to do mine like this, and I'm going to start sewing them together in rows. I don't yet know how many I'm going to put in a row. I'm just going to make it until it's big enough. And this also, I can do this and make these flying geese and set them aside, and when I have enough, then go to make the quilt. I have enough scraps that I'm going to go ahead and do mine, but you could do a flying geese or 2 or 10 a day, whatever, set it to the side, and when you have enough, then make the quilt. But I'm going to start putting mine together like this, and then we'll meet back. I'm just going to fold them on top of each other like that, lay them on top of each other, sew down this line, open it back up, iron it open, and it'll look like this. 1 up, 1 sideways, 1 up, 1 sideways. So I'm going to keep going. When you're sewing your flying geese together, you want to make sure that you don't lose this point right here. The point at the top. I'm going to lay them on top of each other like that. I'm going to flip it over so I'm sewing on this side so that I can make sure not to lose that point. Then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, sew it together. Now I've sewn this together. I'm going to press it. Then I'm going to open it up. That just sets that seam and makes it easier. And then I've now got my flying geese sewn together, and I have not lost that point. So that's the goal in sewing those together. Now let's keep going and sewing them together. So to recap, we took one 6.5 inch rectangle and we ironed it. Then we took 2 3.5 inch squares and we ironed them. Then we took them and laid them on one side of this, drew the line from corner to corner, cut off that corner. Then we're gonna iron that open so it looks like this. We're gonna take another 3.5 inch square and do the same thing on the other side. Take it to the sewing machine like you did the other side, and you'll sew diagonally across. Remember, you can draw your own line if you want to, or just sew diagonally across, up to you. Then you cut this top portion off outside of that seam allowance. I try to go about 1/4 inch away. Put those to the side. Take it to the ironing station. open it up, and you have your flying geese. We're gonna do lots and lots of these and then put them together, and we'll be back. One tip I thought I'd tell you is when you're putting your fabric on the side and you're gonna mark that diagonal line, don't sew from this side down. I mean, you can, it works, but if you sew from this side down, it doesn't get stuck as easily in that feed dog area. Like this right here, sometimes that little point will go down in there and get stuck. If you sew it from this side across, it doesn't get stuck. So I always go from this side across to the bottom. Just a tip that'll hopefully help you. So now I'm going to keep going and keep making more of these. Another tip to speed it up is I like to take two of mine, because I'm sewing them two to the same direction each time, and sew them together and string piece them. Like I've already got these sewn together back here. I'm not even going to cut the thread. I'm just going to keep sewing so that by the time I'm done with all of my two pieces, then I'm ready to string them together into the rows like I've got here. So I'm just going to string all my two pieces together until they're like that. Then I'll cut them apart at the end and piece them together. So I'm going to keep going. Grab two more and sew them until I run out of the flying geese units, the single units. At that point, they'll all be in 2 units, and then I'll sew the rows together. Then when I've got all my units into 2 like this, I'll start sewing them into units like one going sideways, one going up and down. So then all my units will be a 4-piece unit. And again, you may be doing yours different. They may all be going the same way. You may have 4 going one direction and 4 going the other direction. I don't know, but this kind of piecing in units speeds it up a little bit. Now mine's not going to be a fast quilt by any means because I am using scraps. I'm doing what I've got, and then I'll probably sit it down, and when more scraps come about, or as I have time with the big scraps, I'll just keep adding to it until it gets the size that I want it. But now I've got sideways and up and down, sideways and up and down, so now I'm going to sew these units together. And I'm going to make rows until I decide how long I want it based on what that row looks like. When you're to the point of sewing your rows together, you want to make sure, like my pattern is, I've got 2 up and down, I've got 2 sideways. So you want to make sure that they alternate like that. And then when you line them up to sew them, you want these seams to line up. So you'll line them up, roll it to the top, and pin that right there. Now I am going to do it without pinning it, but if it's easier for you to pin it, by all means pin it. If I'm not pinning it, I'm going to take my needle right on that seam and I'm going to stop. My needle. Then I'm going to line the next seam up. I'm going to nest the seams to where one's going one way and one's going the other, unless I've pressed them open. If you press them open, then you're good. Then I'm going to sew till I get to the seam I've got in my hand. I'll stop my needle right there in the down position. I'm going to go to the next one. Now if you pinned it all the way through, you don't have to keep stopping at these seams like I'm doing. I'm going to nest those seams, Make sure it's lined up and do my 1/4 inch. Stop at that seam again. Nest these next seams, one going one way, one going the other. And then sew that section. And I'm going to keep going on this until I get to the end of this row. So this is what we've got so far. I've got my rows together, and this is what it looks like. I was going this way and going across, adding the rows this way, but I'm thinking now it's going to end up being this way because I think I made it too wide. So this is going to be my length, but this is what it looks like, and I like the look. I am not normally a bright fabric person, but the scraps that I've picked are all the bright colored scraps. I'm loving it. So I'm going to keep going with this one, but I don't know how you guys are. I know I have a lot of UFOs, and most everyone does in the quilting world, but I like to have 1 or 2 projects set aside in my sewing room so that, let's say I've got 20 minutes to do a job today, and I don't want to get out some hard, intricate design, or I don't want to start a new project. I've got a couple projects like this going. So I've got these containers, and inside the containers are all my items for this quilt. So I've got a stack over here of the long rectangle 3x6 pieces, or 3.5 by 6.5, and then I've got the squares that are the 3.5 squares to make these pieces. Then when I've got a minute or two and I want to do a couple minutes in the sewing room, but I don't have a lot to get involved in a deep project, this is something I can go to. So I'm not going to finish this quilt today or tomorrow. I'm going to do it a little bit along the way. I'm not in a rush for it. It's not a gift or anything like that to anybody. I'm just going to do it as I can to give me some wind down time in the sewing room, to just wind down at the end of a day, or a few minutes in the morning before I get started if I want to do something, or in the middle of the day. I don't have a lot of time. This is what I'll work on. So I'm going to keep it like this. But I am going to keep these. These are those triangles that we cut off, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with those. And I know some of you are saying, what? Why is she keeping such a small piece? These pieces are good for multiple reasons. There's other scrappy quilts that I've got going. You know I love scrappy quilts. And then remember when we made these blocks and you get to the end and you have just a little bitty piece you need to fill to cover that back piece? This right here would be perfect for that. You just stick it right here and sew it on. So that's what that's for. And if you remember, this is the other scrappy quilt that I've got going at the house that I do a little bit at a time. So like here's one block, here's a block, here's a block. I can just do a block in no time, and I feel like I've done something instead of wasted the little bit of time I had, even though I didn't have a lot of time to sew at the time. And then this was the quilt we were working on. I still haven't finished it yet, but I will. So this is the strip quilt. If you look back in the other videos, you'll see this one. But here's 2 projects that I have going in the sewing room with scraps, and they don't take a lot of thought. I can just go in there and do one in no time. So that is what I am doing with these scraps. That's this quilt in no time, and I love flying geese. So this is going to be really cute and a different one for me because it's real bright, but I'm loving it. And if you don't have one of these type containers, these are marvelous for keeping your projects organized. Or if you're going to a sewing group or a get together with friends and you're taking a project with you, this is great for that too. There's also pouches. These are great as well. I love these 2 ways of transporting my projects, and not only transporting, just keeping them together. So when I go to the sewing room, I grab a bucket or I grab a pouch and I get started on a project, and I don't have to look to see where this piece is or where this piece is. It's all right here together. So if you don't have these two, we sell them here at the shop at SoCharmingQuiltShop.com. They are wonderful. I didn't use them for the longest time. And then Shannon from May Made It came and bought one of these for her projects, for her embroidery projects. And I got to thinking, you know, I sell these things. I know I love these things. I just don't use them. Why don't I have one? I solved that problem and I got one. And then I got two, maybe three. Well, I won't really tell you how many I got. But I've got my projects in these, and I've got my projects in these. I always used these, but I had never added these to the mix, but I am loving them now. So until next time, you guys come back and watch the other videos, like and subscribe. And I do need to say one thing. I looked at my analytics on my page, and the majority of the people watching my channel are not subscribed. Please, if you do nothing else today, please subscribe. It helps us out tremendously. Anybody you watch on YouTube, if you're watching them, please subscribe, because it helps them. It helps you to get notified when they put something else out, because if you're watching them, obviously you like their videos or you wouldn't be watching them. So subscribe. So please, please subscribe. And also, all YouTubers have a goal. We have a goal we're trying to reach. All the other ones have a goal they're trying to reach, and you'd help them reach their goal. So like this video, subscribe to this channel, and until next time, happy quilting.